This is an introduction to Microsoft Access. Okay, so Access is Microsoft's database as part of their Office suite. What I'm going to do today is run through the concepts of it and give you a brief explanation of what it does and how it does things. But I won't give you a huge amount of detail purely because of the amount of time that's available. But if you have any questions about anything, just ask. The reason Access is probably not as well known as the other products is that you can't just go into Access or bumble about and create a document. With Word or Excel or Publisher or any of those things, you can kind of experiment a bit and you can come up with something, and you might not do it the most efficient way or the right way, but you will still end up with a letter or a spreadsheet. With Access, it's a little trickier. You've got to kind of know what you're doing when you start, otherwise you don't get anything. There's that side of it, and also it's a very technical thing. A database is generally a method of holding records. Records consist of fields. So a field would be something like name or address or telephone number, and then records would be Fred's address, Jane's address, Bob's address, etc., etc. And then those records go into different tables, and then we create a database out of it. So there's all sorts of different databases that we use on a regular basis, like accounts packages, payroll systems, CRMs. These are all just databases. In fact, behind the front end, Microsoft Outlook is just a very big, sophisticated database. And you just put on new records every time you create an email or every time you add an appointment in the calendar. Anyway, that's the general gist of it. So here, and hopefully on your screen, is the opening screen to Microsoft Access. We've got a box that says blank database. So loads of templates and things as usual with all these applications, but I'm just going to start with a nice blank database. Now again, this is one of the areas that it differs slightly from things like Word, Excel or PowerPoint. Not so much PowerPoint, but Word or Excel. In that before you start, you have to save the database. So if I click on blank database, and then it says, what do you want to call it? And first of all, I'm going to decide to put it on my desktop so that I can delete it afterwards, because you should never store anything on your desktop. And then I'm going to call it, database one's a bit naff. What's the day? Thursday. I'm going to call it Thursday 1 or 30. Thursday 30. There we go. At this stage, it's probably a good idea to give it a meaningful name, like Blogs and Co CRM or DVD collection or whatever you want a database for. But I'm just going to give it a name, and then I'm going to choose the default file layout, which is 2007 to 2016. There's a load of different file formats, and this is just so that it can work with different packages. A lot of things hook into Access, extracting the data or connecting the data, and sometimes it needs to be in an older format. However, click on OK, and then click on Create. Boom, I've got a database, like so. And the first thing I'm going to do is close this screen here, because that's not what I want. Now, fundamentally, there's 4 key sections to Access. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to sort of not oversimplify, but massively simplify this 2-day training course so that it fits into the hour or 20 minutes, depending how we go. So these 4 key sections are tables, forms, queries, and reports. A table is where you store the data. It looks a lot like a spreadsheet, but it's a much more structured method of creating a spreadsheet. So that's where the data is stored. It's not generally the area that you work with data, because it's not very user-friendly, isn't very pretty, it's just a data store. But that teams up nicely with forms. Now, form is where you make the front end for that data, you make it pretty. So the kind of thing you'd have like an accounts package where you'd see the sales ledger account, or maybe even an application where you would have customer records and things being stored. So the form is the pretty front end, the drop-down boxes and the tick boxes, and the bit where you enter addresses or view addresses. So those two kind of work hand in hand. And then in a similar kind of dynamic, we have queries and reports. A query is where you ask questions about a form and it gives you a load of results. So if you say, I want all of the customers in the Northeast, then on your customer database, you'd have a query that brings up all the customers in the Northeast. It wouldn't be very pretty, it'd just be a list. And again, it'd look a lot like a spreadsheet because it'd just be a bunch of results. So then you have a report which sits on top of the query, and the report says, take this information, make it look pretty, put it in this column here and this column here, and have a nice title, and design it so that it can be printed out or turned into a PDF. So those are the four key sections to an Access database. There's a lot more to it than that. There's macros, there's all sorts of waffle, but that'll be everything we need for today. So this is the exciting bit. Any suggestions of a database type that you'd like? I mean, I could create a customer database, but that's boring. So anyone got any idea of a database or something they'd like to keep records of?
Well, mine was boring because it was just for contacts.
Right, okay. I couldn't do that. Have you got any ideas, Michelle? Or
Well, you said DVD collection. Well, that might be a bit more interesting. You know, mix it all up a bit, and
yeah,
possibly do that.
yeah.
That you can perhaps use personally. You know, just if you want to keep a record of your library of entertainment.
Okay, yeah, that means I've got to think then.
Well, go with contacts because obviously my plan is that, you know, like I said, I wanted to go over the mail merge again because I was thinking of reaching out to a few garden centres because they're going to be the first ones to open and start thinking about what can happen next. So, you know, I'm similar to Sally, really. You know, I'm thinking that is what I'm going to build. I'm going to build a contact list of garden centres to start with.
All right, okay, then we will do contacts in that case. I was thinking like the movie thing. I was thinking, oh right, okay, what fields can I use? We're not going to have many fields on that one, so yeah, let's do customers or clients. Okay, so we'll do exactly that. And so to create a client database, I first of all need a table. So this is the key data store. When we first go into Access, it gives you what looks a little bit like a spreadsheet where it wants you to start entering information, and then it turns that information into a table. It's a horrible way to design a database. Some of the best databases that I've designed that people are still using now after years and years of use are ones where I've spent at least half a day, sometimes a couple of days, just designing the database before even opening Access, because that's how you get things done properly. And normally when I do this course, I'd have a whiteboard and we'd start making notes and design it all before going anywhere. That doesn't translate well to a webinar. But one thing I would say is when it comes to creating a table, the way that Access encourages you to create a table is not necessarily the best way. The way I do it is close that screen that opened up when I first went in, as we saw, and now I'm going to go to create, and then I'm going to say table. And if I click on table again, what will happen is it'll go back to the screen again. And it's like, no, I don't want to create it like this. I want to create this in a design mode. Now, everything that appears down the side, every object has two key views. There's design view, and there's, well, depending on what the thing is, there's form view or table view or report view. So there's the view where it's actually being used, and there's the view where you're designing the structure. And so here it's saying table one. Well, it's not called, it's got to be called something better than that. And here it's kind of got some empty fields that aren't quite right. But if I click on this box here, it will toggle between the two different views. If I click on the drop down, it gives me all the choices of these two. But when I go to design view, and it says, oh, before we switch to design view, you need to give it a name. Well, I'm going to call it clients. Now, a lot of things in Access, the naming conventions are quite important. You can use spaces. I'd highly recommend that you don't, because later on it becomes tedious, where you've got objects with spaces between their names, and it'll make more sense when you've done it. So don't use spaces. Don't use mathematical symbols like obliques and asterisks and things, or don't try to, because they won't pan out well. And some words reserved. So, for example, later on, if I create a field and I try to call it date, that won't work. So here we have a name. So I'm just going to call it clients. At least I hope that's what I've typed. Yes, I did. Good. But if I click on OK, here's my table in design view, which contains nothing so far. What it does, it contains one field, which is ID. It's put that in by default. Now that ID field, you can delete that and create your own, or you can just leave it as it is. Either way is good. I'm going to leave it as it is. I'm going to call it client ID. What it does is it creates something called a primary key. A primary key isn't essential, but it's helpful. It is one field in all the fields that's going to be completely unique for each record. So it's a bit like a customer account number, or a transaction number, or a product code, or a serial number. You don't have to have that, but if you don't have it and then later on you want to do something where you link in or you form a relationship between two different tables, then you've got a problem. Because if you've got a movie database and you've just got the movie name as the unique reference, and then you want to link that to another database where you've got I don't know, actors and actresses and stuff, that might work okay right up until the point where you've got two films that have got the same name, although they're completely different films. And so Blogs & Co might have 10 branches that you want to treat differently, so you can't just call it Blogs & Co. So we'll have client ID. Now, next to it is a data type. I'm going to talk about those later, but first of all, in the interest of speed, I'm just going to bung in all the field names that I want. This is not going to be a highly sophisticated client database, but it's going to be a client database. So we're going to have business name, contact name, address, line 1, address line 2, town, county, country. What else do we need? Phone number, email address, that sort of thing. Just enough to get the gist. So we'll have company name. And again, with these things, I never leave a space. You can leave a space, but I recommend not leaving a space. You'll know why if you ever do the other way. Company name, contact name, address. Oh, always put a space in there. Address line 1, address line 2, town, county, postcode. Postcode. Yeah, postcode is 2 words, I think. Right. Telephone and email. Oh, and notes. It's always good to have a notes field. What should we call notes? Let's call it notes. That gets the point across. So there's a list of things that we want. Now, next to it, we've got data types. There's a whole bunch of different data types, and this is where it's important to get it right. Short text is basically, well, that accounts for most data types. That's pretty much anything that's text. And so name, address, phone number, email, in fact, almost everything there is going to be short text. The limitation on short text is that the maximum size of a short text field is 255 characters. So the majority of the time, for somebody's name or their business name, that's absolutely fine. The other limitation is that you can't do calculations on it because it's text. And so so that's not a problem. Then we have long text. Now that's basically big fields. So for example, if you want a big notes page where you can put a load of waffle in there, you can put directions or details of how to get into the car park, or something where you might be cutting and pasting contents of an email, then you'd use long text. Now, long text doesn't store stuff as efficiently as short text, and although it can be searched, it can't be indexed, so it can't be searched in a quick way. So you can't just go, I'll use long text for everything, because you end up with a really slow database. Then we have number. There's lots of different number types. I won't go into that in detail because I haven't got the time for it. But there's large number, which is a different way of storing a number. There's time and date, which is a different way of storing a number. Currency, etc., etc. These are all just numbers. Then we get auto number, which is the exciting one. And by exciting, I mean mildly interesting. What an auto number does is it takes a whole decimal number. When you create a record, it automatically gives it a number 1. And then when you create another new record, it gives out another number, which would be number 2, etc., etc. You used to get a choice, or I say used to, I imagine you still have the choice of changing that from being the next number to being a random number, which might suit some people. But it's the sort of thing you'd use for invoice numbers, job references, anything, or in this case, it's put auto number on the client ID. So I could create a client ID, I could give them an account number, or if it's potential clients I'm looking at, I don't really want to give them an account number because they've not got an account yet. So I'll just use auto number and it'll give them a number. But I don't have to use auto number. I could use something a little more specific. So that's auto number. Then we get things like yes, no fields. Quite often you'll get a field that goes on there where you just want to say, you just want to tick a box or highlight a radio button or just say yes or no. So, for example, in here, I'm going to say active, whether they're an active client, and then that can be a yes, no field, like so. Highly technical. What else do you have? OLE object. This is quite cute because you can do things like take a picture and drag and drop it into the database. So if you've got products that you're selling or products that you're selling or something, you can reference a picture and get it in there really easily. But if you just want to take a screenshot of a map and drag and drop it, or a person's photo or something, you can have a field that's an OLE object, and you can just take an image and drop it in there, or take any kind of object really, just drop it into your database. It's not incredibly efficient and it never used to work very well, but that's not the point. It is available. And there's some other fields as well which are self-explanatory. Hyperlink. So if you want to just click on a button and it takes you off to the customer's web page, or product details or other stuff like that. Attachment, you can have a file attachment on there, so you can, rather than storing and embedding a file like you would with OLE, you can have a Word document that's somewhere on the server, and the attachment will point you to that file, which makes it more efficient and quicker. You can calculate stuff. I wouldn't do it in here, I'd do it in the form. We'll come back to calculations another day, I think, actually. Look at the time. And lookup wizard, again, you can have a field that's populated by something else. So if you select one answer in one field, the lookup wizard might use that answer to look into another database and then populate this field. And again, you could do that with the form. What I'd do here normally is I'd just put in the basic data types and do any clever calculations in the form, because that way it gives you a lot more flexibility. So let's nip through these quickly then. Company name, contact name, address line, town, postcode. Right, these are all text. Telephone number is also text because it's not a number. You don't do calculations on it like you would with invoice value or product weight or delivery time, and so you still treat it as text. Emails text, notes is going to be big text, so I'll click on the drop down and change it to long text, and then active will be yes or no. Then if we start again, if I click on, I'll click on the very first one. When I click on this data type, down here we have a whole bunch of details. Now, some of these are self-explanatory, some of them take a bit. With the numbers, you've got different kinds of numbers. With an auto number, it defaults to all the answers that it wants. But new values can be an increment, which is so much better than the opposite. Don't want excrement in there. You have increment or random. This is what I was saying earlier about you'll either go to 2, 3, 4 or do a random number. Random number might be useful in certain situations, but I don't need to change that. Format, in this instance, we can't really change the format of an auto number without being daft, but the caption is just a little bit of text that appears at the bottom of the screen, so that kind of help. So it's handy if you're expecting someone else to fill out the box, or if you can never remember what you mean by town. You can say, this is where I want you to type the town name. And so then we get on to indexed. This is really important. Now, for different data types, we have different options down the bottom here, but they all potentially have a choice of being indexed. There's 3 kinds of index. He says, click on the drop down to double check. Yeah. There's no, I don't want this indexed. There's yes, I want it indexed and duplicates are okay. Or yes, I want it indexed and duplicates are not okay. What it means by indexed is that if you want to speed up search ability, so for example, if you're going to search on company name and contact name and maybe the town, then you can say, yeah, let's make those indexed. Now, if you're going to search on something like the client ID, like this, and it needs to be unique, then you can say, yes, make it indexed, duplicates are not okay. So you can't accidentally create 2 records of the same client ID, because otherwise that would defeat the point of having a client ID. If you want to search by the town, it's no good saying, yes, index it and no duplicates, because that means you can only have 1 customer in 1 town. It'd be daft. So you say duplicates are okay for towns, but they're not okay for client ID. And it's a way where you can use it as a way of stopping yourself from duplicating records. You just say duplicates are not okay for email address, for example. That wouldn't really be appropriate, but that might work. You know, that way you don't end up putting in the same contact details for 2 different companies or something like that. Anyway, that's the index settings. There's my pointing on. I have to wear my glasses. It's Thursday. Right, so no duplicates on client ID. Company name, these are all short text, so I'll run through these briefly of what the fields look like on a short text. First thing is field size. The maximum is 255, which it defaults to. If you create your table in a lazy way, in a quick way, it'll always end up being a 255 character field, which is so inefficient and slow. It doesn't matter how much information you type in there. If the field is set to 255, it will take up an amount of space. And so it's better to keep it as close as possible. If you make the field too small and you suddenly decide a couple of weeks down the line, oh, company name now needs to be 10 characters bigger, that's fine. You can increase it. It won't be a problem. But if you leave it as 255 and then you think, like, why is this so big and so slow and so cumbersome? I've only got a few records in there. Reducing the field size isn't so easy. I mean, you can reduce it, but there's no guarantee that you won't lose data because you might end up chopping off 10 characters of something. So I would say things like company name, yeah, 50 characters should do it. Contact name, again, 50 characters. And so you can kind of like get a feel for the size of a field by just looking at it and thinking about how big they normally are. I'm not going to go through all of these. I'll give you a quick rundown. Required, yes or no, is whether it needs to have something in there. You can set this at this stage or you can set it at the form stage. I'm not going to set it on here. As that allow zero length is a similar kind of question, but it basically is about the way that it's stored, which I'm not going to go into detail. Index. Now, company name, yes, it would make sense to index that. And then you can say whether you can decide whether you want to have duplicates. So if you think like, well, I want to put a separate record for each one of their branches, the duplicates are okay. If you don't want to put a separate one for each branch, you want to have one and then just different addresses, then duplicates are not okay. I'm going to say no duplicates. That's all we need for now. We can put a format on there to make the text go in a certain format, like a bank sort code. We can put an input mask on there to restrict what information people can enter in. And caption, we saw that earlier. That's a little bit of help that appeared down here, just above the taskbar. Default value, things like credit limits, that's handy. You can just say, well, they get a £500 credit limit to start with, and rather than type it every time, you can just put it in as a default value. Or if you've got country there, then you can put UK by default if you've only ever once or twice of a foreign firm in there. And you can put a validation rule which says things like this value needs to be greater than this but less than that, or it needs to be divisible by this, that, or the other. And then below it you can put a bit of text that will pop up if you enter the wrong detail. So like car value, you can put a maximum value of £100,000. And if somebody accidentally types too many zeros, it will say, hey, we definitely haven't got any cars that are worth, you know, £500,000. So those are the kind of things you can put in there. But for now, I'm just going to go through and quickly change the field size for all of them. Now, there is a fast way of doing this where I can select a whole bunch of them and do them at the same time. But I've got too far now anyway. Town and county, I think I can do those in 25. Postcode, 10 characters should cover that. And because it's got the word code in the name of the field, it instantly assumes that it wants to be indexed. Now, I'll let it have that. Actually, no, I won't, because that's ridiculous. I'm not going to search by postcode. Telephone, how big is a telephone number? 20 characters. Email address, 25. Notes, it's a different field type, so it doesn't have a size limit on it. And active, again, it's a different field type, so it stores things in a different way. We can change it from yes, no to true or false, or on or off. It makes absolutely no difference because it just stores it as one or the other anyway, and then you can make it display how you want it to display. So that's our long drawn out method of creating a table. You can have dozens and dozens of tables, and so you don't have to get all the information on there. If you wanted to keep a record of all of his clients' purchases or all of their inquiries, then you'd put that in a different table and you'd link the two together and you have a relational database. We won't have time for that today, but that's a general principle. Now, we don't have to have a primary key, as I said earlier, but this one, by default, is created as a primary key. If I wanted to set one or choose a different one, I could do that by pressing this button here. That unsets it, and then I press it again, it sets it, and you can see the little key that turns up next to it. Yeah, just about. Nothing else to say on that, really. I've already given it a name, so all I've got to do is exit out, and then it will go, do you want to save it? And I say, well, of course I do. It'd be madness not to. So there's my table. And if I double click on it, it'll open it up. If I close that and click once on it and click on view, why isn't that opening up? That's weird. If I right click and say open, it'll open it up. If I right click and say design, it'll open it in design view. So I can go back in and go, oh, I forgot to put in the URL or the website or something. Actually, I'm going to do that now. So if I want to put website, I'm going to put it just above email. So I can click there, right click, say insert, so it's in the right place, and there I can put website. And then I'm going to change that to a hyperlink. That'll do for now. One thing that we do have, and because it's optional, quite often people ignore it, is the description for that field. When you're creating a database, if it's something like this, it's kind of obvious. Company name, you don't need to put in there, this is where I wanted to type the company name, because you kind of know it's going to be company name. But when it's things like order number, be like, this is the client's order number, or this is the supplier's order number. It's sometimes helpful because otherwise you go back to a database where you might have hundreds of fields and you think like, is that the number where I'm referencing the stuff that's coming in or going out? And it's, that sort of thing. Order date. Was that the date that it was ordered or the date it arrived? So this can be handy, and sometimes you need to put a bit of waffle in there so that you know that you've done it one way for a reason. Anyway, I've made that amendment, and now I'm going to close it again and say yes to save changes. So I now have a database. Hurrah! And if I double click on clients, I get my client database, which, as I said earlier, looks a little bit like a spreadsheet. So I can press tab and I can put blogs and co. It'll be blogs and it'll be 12 by street. And the town will be, let's say, Canterbury. Kent, postcode E1. 0AB, that's probably a real address. And the phone number 01227 896 654. don't phone that. I don't know whose number that is. And the website can be, let's make them a fan of scuba diving, paddy.co.uk. So you get the general gist of it. And we can say spacebar to make it active or make it inactive. And when I get to the end and hit the tab key again, I'm now on the next one, and it says new because it's a new record. And then as soon as it becomes an actual real record, Smith and Son, this one, we're really original here, Sons. As soon as I hit a new record, it says that's client ID number 2. And let's just got a bit more waffle in there. None of these are compulsory, so I don't have to fill any of those fields in. That is my table, and if I close, it comes out of it, and I double click to open it up again, there it is. And if I decide I want to change the design, I can click on that design button and add bits, amend bits, and do whatever. So out of the 4 things that I spoke about at the beginning, this is the first thing you're going to start with. The next thing is the form. We're not going to talk about reports and queries, because reports and queries, we haven't got time for them. But instead I'm just going to do a form now. So if I go to create, and here's the buttons for creating a form. When it comes to doing things that are sort of pretty or graphical, there's nothing wrong with just using the form wizard and let it do all the hard work for you. And sometimes it will look quite reasonable, and sometimes it will look dreadful. But you can create as many forms as you like, and if the first one looks rubbish, just delete it and start again. Or you might even have 2 forms for one table. So if you was doing a client database, you might have one form for the salespeople where they can look at information about directions and turnover and that kind of stuff and contact names. And you could have another form for the accounts department where they can look at information about outstanding invoices and payment history. And just because there's only one table doesn't mean that you can't have 2 forms looking at it. But in this instance, I just want to create a form to make it nice and user-friendly. So I'm going to go for the form wizard. It then says, what are you going to base it on? Well, I'm going to base it on the only data source that we have, which is clients. And it's going to say, what fields do you want to see? Pretty much want to see all the fields, because otherwise it would have been pointless putting them on there. I could hide the client ID, but in this instance, it's going to be useful. So I'm going to click on that to bring them all over. I could do it one at a time, or if I change my mind and say, oh, I don't want that one, send that one back. But I do want that one, so I'm going to leave it there. Next, how do you want it to look? Do you want it in columns? Yeah. Do you want it tabular? Not really. That's where you'd have the sort of headings across the top and loads of records below. I want one record per page, so in columns would be most suitable. I can have data sheets which looks exactly like a table without a form, which makes it almost completely pointless, but not quite. And then justified basically is a way of making it look really horrible, which I'm not going to do. So I'm going to go for the top one and click on next. What do I want to call it? Yeah, clients, that'll do. Do I want to open it and view the information, or go straight for the design? No, I'm just going to see how bad it looks first of all. So if I click on finish, yeah, that's not too bad. So there's my database. Wildly overdone the amount of space that's needed for the client ID. These bits they could do with being lined up with these bits to make it look pretty. That notes page, I could make that a lot bigger and use this bit of the screen for it, or quite often I would put this onto a different layout so that I had a separate tab for notes. But on the whole, that's not too bad. So I can exit out of that now, and that's a working, ready to go form. And down here we can see tables and forms. And then if I double click on that, I can go in and I can start using it. Down here I've got navigation buttons. Take me to the next record, take me to the previous record, take me to the first record, take me to the last record, create a new record. That's quite cute. And I can exit out by clicking on the cross, and that works. But if I want to be big and clever, I'll make it look pretty. And if I click on this button over here, there's a drop down. There's 3 different ways we can do this. I can either use the form view, which is viewing it in this working state, or I can use the design view, which is a highly detailed way of changing its appearance. So that's very similar to tables, where you can have the design view or the table view. But there's also something in the middle called layout view. I'm not going to do that right now because that's another way of changing the design, but I find the design view a more comprehensive way of doing it. So I've got to go to design view. And here it is. And we can see things like boxes that I can click and drag and reposition or resize. If I want to do a load of things at the same time, I can select a load of boxes and then hover over it, drag it to the right. I could take all these ones as well, do that with those. I don't need to do this, it's just for the sake of it. Phone number, might as well make that bigger because it could end up being a lengthy phone number. Email and website, should really make those the same size. Like so. Client ID, let's make that smaller because they look silly. And then these names down the side, I can click on that and I can change those because they're just text labels. Let's call that client ref. And I can put spaces in between because, as I say, this is just a text label now and I just want it to look pretty. So I'll call that address, And that one there, if I click on that and press the small delete key, that will delete the label that's there, which I don't want because I know that I'm still working on the address. Town, county, postcode, let's put space in postcode. Telephone, website, email, yeah, that'll do. This is the size of the form, and even on this small screen, I've got loads of space. Over here is where I'd have detailed settings or properties for individual fields. I'm going to close that property page, and then I'm going to grab this bit at the side and drag it over. So it still doesn't fill up the whole page, but now I can do something more interesting. I'll grab this notes page. Let's put that over here and have a nice big chunky notes page. Actually, I'm going to put it there. And then I'm going to take that box and make it nice and big. Like so. And that notes, I'm going to take that and put it above where it says notes. If I click on it and drag it now, it'll move it and move that at the same time, which is not what I want. So instead, I'm going to click on the corner of it, drag it, and it'll move just that one bit on its own. They're not really lined up properly. However, what I'm going to do is select those two, go to Arrange and Align, and then say to the left. So they're lined up perfectly now. This kind of stuff you can spend hours getting it lined up and making it look pretty, which I'm not going to do because it is really boring to watch and probably quite boring to do as well. But that's the general gist of it. Then I'll take the active one, let's move that up so it's a bit closer. And you can just have seconds of fun with this. What I will do is I'm going to tidy up this header a bit because that looks a bit rubbish. Clients, well, let's put it, I don't know. My CRM, that'd be a really awful title. No, just put my CRM system or CRM system. Wow. Anyway, give it a meaningful name, or preferably no name. Everything's got properties. If I click on something like the active button, I can go through all kinds of properties there. I'm not even going to start these things, but it's so powerful. We can do things like if you double click it, it'll activate an event. If you click once, it'll activate a bit of code. If you go into that box, it'll populate another box. So many things you can do. You can have a fully functional application within Access. But like I say, we're not going to cover that now. What I will do though is I'll show you how we can add some objects to this to make it a little friendlier. So down here, I'm going to, once I line that up, don't like it being out of line, I'm going to put some buttons. So if I go to design, here's a whole bunch of controls we can use. And if I click on the drop down, I can see all of them. The only thing I'm interested in doing now, because of time constraints, is adding some buttons. There's a button. I click on that. I can click down here, and it says, so you want a button. The button I want is one that will close this form. So I'm going to say it's a form operation, close form. Click on next. Do you want text or a picture? I want a picture. That's a bit of a rubbish picture for closing a form. Oh, it's better than that one. Okay, I'm going to leave that. Click on next. What name do I want to call the button? I'll never see that name. I'll leave it as command 27. And then later on when I start doing coding, I see all these different command buttons. I think, what the heck is that? A meaningful name would be handy. So I'll call it exit button. And click on finish. There's my exit button. And now I'm going to go into here again, do another command button. And this one's going to be record navigation. So I'm going to have, no, it is record navigation, but actually no, I'm not going to do a new record button. Yeah, I am. So many decisions. New record button. Now these really are rubbish pictures. If I click on that, I can find other pictures. It really should be a sparkly arrow thing. Why am I wasting time doing this when I could just untick that and use a button that doesn't look appropriate? Yeah, so this is the add records thing. And then I would call that something meaningful. Click on finish. And then finally, I'm going to just go backwards and forwards buttons. So this will be navigation. So go to next, usual sort of thing, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to speed up the pace now and go to previous. Go to previous. Right. So then I'm going to make this look pretty by putting that one there. That'll be the exit button. That'll be going back one. That'll be going forward one. That'll be creating a new one. And now if I save that or close that, it will save it. When I open this, there's my lovely form. And I can go to the next record, I'll go to the previous record, or I can create a new record. When I'm bored, I can click on this to exit out of it, like so. I can create a form with dirty great big buttons that works as a table, not a table, a menu, that's the word I'm looking for. Then I can go to different forms and run reports and things, and it will be really user friendly. Or I could just do a shortcut to that one form on my desktop, so it opens that by clicking on the shortcut. Or the easy way of doing it is creating a little macro that will open this or open the main menu as soon as I open this file. I can do that, but you won't be able to see it happen because when I exit out of Access, it won't show anything on the screen except me, which won't help at all. But the way that that's done, or the easy way to do that, is to go create and say I want to create a macro. Click on macro, and I'm going to create a macro that opens the client's form. And so it'll be form, or it'll be open form, open form. And the form name, I have all the forms I've got on there. I'm going to open clients. What view do I want it in? Form view, oddly enough. Window, let's make it maximize. No, I don't have that choice. The next thing I'm going to say maximize, just in case the window isn't maximized for some bizarre reason. Oops, that wasn't the right button. Right, maximize window. Right, okay. And I'm going to close this, and it's saying, do you want to save it? Yes, I do. I don't want to call it macro 1 though. I want to call it auto exec. Now, in the ancient times, we had an operating system called DOS. Auto exec was a very important batch file.
Right.
That's right. We don't need to go into what that all means though. But when I say OK to that, there's a little macro called auto exec. Now, when I open this file called 30, what it will do when I open it, it will run this macro, which will look something like this. Ta-da! And if I have that out of the way, then that'll be my wonderful database. And if I was opening a menu, then rather than having a close form button there, I'd have a close or exit application button. And then what that would do, just like this, like all the other buttons, except it'd be under application, it'd be quit application, and I'd use a different icon because that's horrible, but anyway, what that would do then is that would exit right out. So now if I go back to this, I click on that, it'll exit out of Access. And that is all we have time for today. So, does anyone have any questions?
That's interesting. Thank you, Glyn. Just to say, when you first started doing this, I was like thinking, well, this is just duplicating what you can already do in Excel, you know. So it was a bit of a puzzle to me. But what you've brought in at the end with all these magic buttons and how you can create your own CRM system, I can see what it does, which Excel doesn't do, you know. So very good, very interesting. Thank you.
The drop-down boxes as well. Wait to get to that. That's a world of excitement because then you can have choices and things and user-friendliness beyond your dreams. But you can literally make it look like an application, turn off the ribbons and navigation panes at the side and stuff. And it really can be really flexible. But in its very basic form like this, it is at least just a great way of storing names and addresses in a way that you can extract them out and do reports on them. So there we go. So Sally, do you have any questions?
I was just going to say, I know you haven't got time to go through reports, but I'm guessing when you've built all of your database up and everything, is it quite easy to then do some reporting from it? Is there a wizard? Does it kind of look at what's there for you and point you in the right directions?
I'll show you quickly, but I won't explain it.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be almost helpful.
I'll work it out for myself.
Yeah, you can just watch it on the rewind, watch it slowly. So, for example, if I wanted all of the customers in Kent, if I want a button there that I press and it runs a report to show all the customers in Kent, which is not the way I design a database, but I'm going to do it anyway, I'd say, right, I need a query. And to do that, I'll go to create and I'll say queries. Don't believe in doing wizards for things as important as queries. So I'll go to query design and I want to base it on my table called clients. So there's a list of all the fields. And if I say, right, I want to see company name, contact name, town, county, phone number. And then if I see what that looks like, that's all the information that I want on my report, so that's great. I go back to design mode. I only want the ones that are in Kent though, so where it says town, under here, I'm not going to do any sorting or anything, I'm just going to go to criteria, and I'm going to put the word Kent in speech marks. I should put equals, but I'm just going to let it do that. Work it out all by itself. No, that didn't work. Okay, let's put equals. I thought I was going to be really lazy then, and it was just going to do it for me. And that's because I'm in town, you muppet. Right. Right, let's try that again. There we go. I don't know whether it would have just worked that out without the equal sign. It would have done. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is I've got a query and that's now listing all the ones that meet that criteria. You can make a really complex query, but we're not going to. So I can execute this and say, what do you want to call it? And I'm going to call it Kent Companies. So okay to that. So there it is on my queries list. Now I'm going to create a report, and because a report is just a pretty thing, I'm quite happy to use a report wizard. Now here's a data source. I'm going to choose Kent Companies, and there's the fields. Yeah, I want all of those. That's why I put them in there. Next, do I want any grouping or sorting? Yeah, I'll be lucky. There's nothing here to sort or group. I could sort by town. There's only one record in there, and I can choose different layouts. To be totally fair, they don't really tend to look great, whichever one you choose, but I'm going to do that and adjust it afterwards. Preview the report. Ta-da! There it is. And if I want to make it work better, like sort this big gap there out, I can go into close that and reduce the size of that field and the size of the heading even. Choose those two, drag them over, and they look slightly less rubbish. And if I do a preview, yes, that'll do. Just got to make one more change. Company, contact, no. So now, if I exit out of there, can't see the cross, there it is, save that. Then in my form, clients, I'm going to put a button there that runs that report, which, like I said earlier, is completely the wrong way of doing it. Well, that's not the point. I'm going to do it anyway. We've got a button there, and it's going to be a report operation to preview the report, and that's the only one we got, and that's what it's going to look like. I could even resize it so that it looks really weird, disproportionate. Exactly the look I'm going for on this database. So now we can navigate and do stuff, and then when I want to report, I can click on that, and ta-da, there's the report. And then I can press a button, and it'll go direct to the printer. There it is, or to Excel. I want to be really big and clever. And when I've had enough, I can close that. Back to my system. Easy, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
Good.
All right.
That'll be it then.
So always build the query before you build the report.
Yes, definitely. You can go back and change it, and you can have more reports on one query, or use loads of queries to do loads of different things. But you make the table and then put the form on top, or the form sits in front so you can view the contents of the table, and you build the query to select the data, and then the report goes on top so you can make the query look pretty. Easy as that. And then you get into the wacky world of relationships between tables, and that is
That's for a whole other day.
oh yeah.